Morning. For the few of you that may not know, the clip we just watched was from this last week. That was ESPN analyst Dan Orlovsky praying on live TV. Monday night during the Bills-Bengals game, one of the players named Damar Hamlin was injured while tackling the running back. His heart had stopped beating on the field, and they had to perform CPR and even use a defibrillator to resuscitate him. It wasn't until sometime Wednesday before he woke up and Thursday before he was breathing on his own again. And so this video is from Tuesday, the NFL Live show on ESPN, and I saw it when someone had shared it to Facebook. I thought it was just really cool, and it's something a moment that should be celebrated and applauded. And thank God that he's awake and he's seems to be on the road to recovery. But I saw that and I was like, man, that's amazing. And then also in the back of my head, I had a little voice just, I can't believe he got away with that, on live TV. That got me thinking a little bit. I can't remember in the last 20 years, the last time I saw someone on a network TV show like that praying. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but since the aftermath of 9/11, I can't think of any instance where someone has dared to pray on a national news or sports broadcast. I mean, if we're honest, it's not very popular to be a Christian in this country anymore. At least it's not popular to be one publicly. That kind of thing is something that people believe should be kept to ourselves, that we practice in our own time quietly. It used to be a lot more popular, a lot more common to be a Christian in this country. It used to be a normal thing. I remember when I was in 4th and 5th grade, one day a week we would have this religious ed class at our school that would come. Your parents had to fill out a permission form, but then you would get to go to they had this trailer that they would park alongside the school property, and every week for about 30 minutes we would have this class. And it wasn't everyone in my class, but a good number of the kids in my class would go. And there were little wooden desks on either side of it and a little aisle down the middle, and I think the teacher was a lady from a nearby Catholic church. But this was every week. But 5-6 years later, when my sisters were old enough to go, I think they had already done away with that by then. But we never got made fun of for going. That was a normal thing. And we're blessed in this community that our students can attend Christian Club and FCA at the schools. And we have a lot of really good Christian teachers in our school system. But if we look around us, we're not the majority in this anymore. It's not popular anymore to have a genuine faith. And this is truly an American church problem, because there's a lot of places in the world where it's illegal and even dangerous to be a Christian. Here it's just unpopular. But that seems to be enough to create a huge problem in our church today. There are churches all over the country that are closing their doors. People are leaving the church in large numbers. And many of the mainstream churches and denominations are changing their theology, specifically on issues of right and wrong, in order to appease today's culture. Because our culture believes that it's no longer acceptable for Christians to disagree with sin. So in order to keep from offending anybody, many churches choose to ignore or even accept things that God calls sinful. We're in a battle with this world, and it's a battle that's been going on since the beginning of time. The same battle that caused Adam and Eve to disobey God in the garden. And it's a battle that we're currently losing in our culture, and I think the reason for that is because oftentimes we're losing it in our own lives. I was reading in 1 John chapter 2 this week, and I was kind of bouncing around different books of the Bible, trying to just come up with an idea for a sermon topic for today. And I just got stuck on these 3 verses. They kept, even when I was moving on to something else, they were just kind of in the back of my head. And it was in 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. And it says this. There we go. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, and the desires of the eyes, and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. I think this passage got stuck in my head because it made me a little uncomfortable. I felt kind of convicted by it. Now, I can honestly say my deepest desire is to follow God with my life and to help others do the same. But how often do I get distracted by the desires of the world? And honestly, we're not even talking like the big three, the money, sex, power, that kind of thing. Those temptations are everywhere around us, but the ones that I think usually sneak past us are those desires for comfort and for entertainment. I mean, if you can think about, like if you get onto Amazon or even any social media, the advertisements, how many products that are out there that are designed to make our lives easier. And that's a big pull for us, because if we can be convinced that something will make our lives easier or make us a little more comfortable, then we become convinced that that's something that we have to have. And we crave entertainment, whether it's television, whether it's hobbies, whether it's video games. Comfort and entertainment are a dangerous combination together. And the desire for those things can quickly become an addiction. I mean, if we look at social media, everything on social media is designed for us to keep coming back for more and more. We're drawn by the advertisements and the content, and then the more we digest of it, the more we become dissatisfied with our own lives. We have to have more. There's someone that has it better than we do. So we feel this subconscious desire to chase after more. And this whole time we don't realize how distracted we've become. And then it gets really dangerous, because then once we've built this comfortable life for ourselves, we don't want to risk losing any of it. We don't want to put any of it at risk. Look how good I have it. Look how I've got a good thing going here. I don't want to ruin that. I don't need something that's going to make my life more difficult. I've worked really hard to make it as comfortable as I can. I'm reminded of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 19. And I would say most of us are familiar with that story. And I know there's a lot of things in that story that's not all that suitable for all audiences, or just, kind of uncomfortable even to cover. And I'm not going to go into a whole great detail about that, but if you'll turn there to Genesis 19. In chapter 18, God comes to Abraham and he tells him he's going to destroy these two cities because of their wickedness. And Abraham has this long conversation with God, and he's kind of bargaining with God. He first comes, he says, are you going to destroy everybody? Like, there's got to be some good people in there too, right? Like, what if there's 50 righteous people in the city? And God says, okay, if I can find 50 righteous people in those cities, I won't destroy them. And Abraham kind of gets a little bit more courage. He says, well, if you're okay with 50, what if it's only 45? Like, if you're not going to destroy 50, what about 45? And God says, okay, if we can find 45 righteous people in the city, then I won't destroy it. And then Abraham goes back and forth again and again. He finally ends up talking to God, what if you can find 10? What if it's just 10 people? And God's like, okay, if I can find 10 righteous people in those cities, I'm not going to destroy the city. So then Abraham leaves, and then God goes about getting ready to destroy the city, because he already knew there's not 10 righteous people in those cities. But before he does that, he sends two angels in the form of men down to the city on a rescue mission. They're there to get Abraham's nephew, Lot, and his family. And if you've read back before, this is not the first time Lot needs rescuing. He seems to be just kind of a pill. I mean, he's always a hassle for Abraham. He just always, there's not much good said about Lot. Like, every time he's mentioned, it's not in a positive light. But because of Abraham, he goes after his nephew, Lot, and his family. And so the two angels come to the city of Sodom, where Lot is living, and he greets them, and he invites them into his house. But then later that evening, this is where it gets kind of uncomfortable, but later that evening, men from the city come to Lot's house with really disgusting and perverted intentions. And Lot even goes so far as to try and offer up his own daughters to these men in place of the guests that he's welcomed into his house. He tells them, please don't do this wicked thing. I have two daughters. You can have them instead. It's a really bizarre and just absurd scene. But they refuse, and it ends up with the two angels that are in Lot's house. They end up blinding the men that are surrounding them, and they can't even find the door. And it's at this point then that they tell Lot of God's decision to destroy the cities, and they warn him. So if you want to turn there to Genesis 19, starting in verse 12. says this. It says, then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? It's talking about the angels are saying this. Sons-in-laws, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city. Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. Lot had become so comfortable living in this detestable place that he had even found men from the city to marry his own daughters. But when he went to go get them, they didn't believe what he was saying. They thought he was just joking and they wouldn't come with him. So let's continue on at verse 15. It says, as morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought him out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. Now, this is the part that baffles me. I don't understand. It says he hesitated. He knew exactly what was about to happen to the city, but he still didn't want to leave. He couldn't let it go. The attraction of living here, even as disgusting and corrupt as it had become, was something he didn't want to give up. He knew the destruction that was coming, but he didn't want to give up the life that he had made for himself in Sodom. Now, Sodom was a wealthy city. And Lot, when he moved there with a great deal of possessions of his own. Because if you look back further, there's a conversation where Abraham and Lot, their workers, or whatever you want to call it, are kind of clashing, and they decide to be best if they separate their herds and their possessions and kind of go their separate ways. And so Abraham gives Lot first pick, and Lot sees this land where the city of Sodom and Gomorrah are, and he thinks that's the best one, so he chooses that for himself, and then he moves himself into the city of Sodom. He chose to go there. That was all his own doing. And so he was moving there with a great deal of possession, so living there afforded him this lifestyle that he desired. And in order to maintain this lifestyle, though, he had to make some concessions. He put up with the wickedness in the city. When the men come to his door to demand for him to send out his guests, he tells them, he begs them, please don't do this wicked thing. You can see that he doesn't agree with how they behave or agree with the actions of the people. But he enjoyed the lifestyle that living there afforded him so much that he was willing to tolerate how corrupt and disgusting its practices had become. To him, it was worth putting up with that in order to have the lifestyle he wanted. I think we all need to ask ourselves some questions. What concessions am I making to maintain a comfortable faith? Am I being lazy in my faith? Am I afraid of risking anything? Am I more concerned about protecting what I already have and maintaining my lifestyle than I am about reaching those around me? Do I keep my faith quiet to avoid conflict and confrontation? Christianity in this country has gotten comfortable, and it's been that way for a while, and that's a dangerous place to be. Let's skip on down to verse 23, and we'll continue reading. It says, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Sorry. We all know this part of the story. Lot's wife looking back at the destruction of the cities. And it wasn't out of curiosity. She longed to go back there. She regretted leaving that life behind. And instead of taking advantage of God's mercy, she turned around and it cost her. All right, let's finish with verses 27 through 29. It says, and Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So we see in this last verse there, the only reason why God had spared Lot was not because of anything he had done to deserve it. He saved Lot solely for the sake of Abraham. Because Lot had already made his choice, and if it hadn't been for Abraham, he would have perished in the city like everyone else. The one thing that Lot did right in this whole story is he didn't look back, even though, unfortunately, his wife ended up doing that. You know, a comfortable faith is a dangerous thing. We'll put up with a lot in order to avoid making waves. When we're comfortable, we don't want to give it up. We don't want to move from that comfort. We don't want to take risks. You know, we'll complain on Facebook about government-funded abortion, but we won't help out at a pregnancy center or even reach out to the single mom living next door. You know, we complain about the moral decline of our country, but we won't even hold each other accountable for fear that it might make someone angry at us. You know, in Revelation chapter 3, God's speaking to the church there in Laodicea, and he could very easily have been speaking to the church here in America, and he says this in verses 15 and 16. He says, I know your works, you are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. You know, I can't point the finger at anyone. I struggle with this just as much as the next person. I struggle to be uncomfortable. I struggle when it comes to taking risks. I say all of this knowing full well that God is going to give me a chance really soon to do something about it. It's always how it works. That's probably why it was uncomfortable for me to write this sermon. But we have to ask ourselves, how do we fix this? In order to do something about it, we have to recognize that living out our faith means getting messy. But it's worth it. We have to take risks. We have to be willing to sacrifice. We have to give up this desire for comfort and entertainment. In Matthew chapter 25, Jesus is talking about the final judgment, and he used this comparison of a shepherd separating his herd, separating the sheep from the goats in his herd. And in verses 34 through 40, he says this. It says, Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. It's messy getting involved in someone else's life. It's messy helping someone who doesn't know Christ or whose life is falling apart. Going to those who truly need Christ is not a safe thing. It will cost us something. Maybe not just money, but it'll cost us time. It'll cost us energy. It'll cost us a lot of patience. It'll cost us forgiveness, and it'll cost us mercy. Even when it comes to keeping each other accountable and walking through struggles with fellow believers, it gets messy as well. You know, feelings will get hurt. Relationships might become strained. People might become angry. But again, it's worth it. James 5:19 and 20 says this. My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. We weren't called to a comfortable faith. We weren't promised an easy life. What we were promised was trials, struggles, and persecution in this life. But more than that, we were promised an eternity that is greater than anything this life could offer us. You know, in Matthew 6, part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is saying, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But instead store up treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Now, I was looking back at a sermon I preached about this same time last year. And I had said at the end of that sermon that my prayer for this year was for boldness. And I think that applies again to this year as well. I pray that we would be bold in stepping out in our faith. And I pray that we would be dissatisfied with what this life has to offer and instead focus on the eternity awaiting us with Christ, because it's worth it. Let's pray. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, God, we ask for the courage and the boldness to set aside our comfort, set aside our desire for an easy life in order to seek out those that don't know you, those that are lost without you. God, I pray that, God, that our focus, we would not become distracted by the material, the desires of this world. That, God, that we would remain focused on the mission to which you've called us. We pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.